Chapter 20 introduces the fourth declension for nouns in Latin. And unlike some of the other declensions that we've had, mostly like second and especially third, third is the largest declension just by the number of nouns that are actually a part of it in Latin. Fourth declension has relatively few nouns. It's not used a whole lot, and there's only a handful of words that are masculine, feminine, or neuter in it that we're going to really need to concern ourselves with. You're not going to see this as much. Still need to learn it. It still shows up in the Latin. It's still important. Again, I'm not going to make you learn something that isn't important. So we do need to learn it. And really, it's known as like the U declension, or at least that's what I'm going to call it. And that's because there's a ton of U's. If we look at words, the words like fructus and genu, both of them have a genitive ending that's at US, a long US, which is going to tell you, hey, that's the fourth declension ending there, is this US is the one that you need to know. If you see that, just like we had AE for first, or I for second, or IS for third, US is fourth declension. And realistically, there's a set of endings for masculine or feminine, and the endings are actually kind of unique in the neuter, to the point that it's not even just that simple rule of like nominative, accusative, vocative are the same, and the plurals end in A. There's actually at least one spot that it's a little bit different. So without wasting any more time, let's just see what the chart actually is. So for fourth declension, nominative is that US, genitive US, it's technically a long US, dative is UI, accusative UM, ablative U, nominative plural US, again, genitive is UUM, dative ibus, accusative plural US, and ibus. So if you notice here, most of these have that U right before one little ending. Really, the only place that doesn't is your dative and your ablative plural. Okay, if it's neuter, just like if we saw like genu, it's going to be a U, and then US, long again, and then pretty much all straight through the rest of the neuter chart is U. So this is what I was talking about. Nominative and accusative are the same. The vocative would be the same too with a U. But we even have it in the dative, and the ablative is pretty consistent with what we get, masculine or feminine. But this dative one is a little bit different. Okay. Now remember, the plurals of those end in A, so instead of US we have UA. Genitive, still U, UM. Dative, still ibus. Accusative, instead of US, it's that UA again. And ablative is ibus. So here's your two charts, masculine and feminine, or for neuter. You need to know these. Again, so you should be able to tell me, if we had knees, right, and you wanted to make it plural, that'd be genua, right, as opposed to if we said fruits, fructus, US. A lot of these, it's going to be a little difficult to tell what case it is. What will really help is if there's adjectives, because the adjectives will then narrow it down, because they will have different endings. They're either going to have third declension endings or first or second declension endings. So having to agree in gender, number, case will then narrow it down which one it is, instead of like, which one of these US's is it, right? So that should be able to help out at least a little bit. So know these charts, know these endings. We will see them, and obviously there's going to be a quiz on them at some point, so you do need to know them, even just for that. Moving on, there's only really two other things in the chapter that are touched on here, and let's see if we can, we'll have to move down. Two uses of the ablative that are a little bit important. We have the ablative of place from which, right here, ablative place from which, and also ablative separation. So ablative of place from which is going to have a verb of motion Typically, it's showing a place from which you're coming with a preposition, either ob, de, or ex. And then I have two examples here. So they sailed from Greece. They sailed away from Greece. We're going to have that right? Graecia, and then they sailed away. We could also say something like the river flowed down from the mountain, and flumen de, down from the mountain flowed. So both of these are showing the ablative of the place from which. Where is the river, flowing from which place, or they sailed from which place, right? And these are telling you that. De, ex, the river flowed out of the mountain, you could even say, showing motion towards something. Okay, that's ablative of place from which. Honestly, we've seen this. It's just now we're putting a name to it. This is the way that we've used these prepositions. This is the way that we've used ob, de, and ex this whole entire time. Now we're just sort of putting a name to it. Ablative of separation is a little different. There's no verb of motion, so it's just showing that someone is separate from somewhere else or something else. It can have that ob, de, or ex, right? If it was like I'm 100 miles from you, you might say like ob, away from, or ex, out from, something like that. But the preposition is sometimes omitted, and this is especially true with verbs like to free, to lack, or to be deprived of something. So if we look at this first example, Cicero kept the enemy from the city. We still have ob orbe, because Cicero prohibited the enemy from the city. That's fine, and that's very much similar to what we've already learned, just the differences with the verb. In the two above, we had flowed and sailed, verbs of motion, right? And here we just have prohibuit, so we just have like prohibited, and that's not a verb of motion, right? So that's the big difference in this sentence. Now, in the second sentence, he freed them from fear. We have the verb freeing, right? Liberavit, and he freed them from fear, metu, just by itself. Again, you don't need the preposition every single time, especially with verbs like to free, or to lack, or to be deprived from something. So again, with the verbs free, lack, or deprive, you'll probably have something where this is omitted. Most of the other times, like this first example with Cicero, you're going to still have that a or ob. It's really just with these particular verbs, okay, like careo or libero. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the chapter as far as what new grammar there is. There's fourth declension, and there's these two ablative uses. We've already seen the one, and ablative of place from which we've already seen. Ablative of separation, we'll see in the practice as we get going with it. This is kind of an easy chapter, giving you a little break after all of the passives. Now we'll still see those passives, just we're sort of continuing to build our knowledge. Okay, so a pretty easy chapter overall.